You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 6.
Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, and building a purposeful career. And now, your host, Dr. Renee Paul Gauthier.
Hi, everyone. Today I have a great conversation with international viola soloist Matthew Lipman. Recipient of a prestigious 2015 Avery Fisher Career Grant, Matthew has been hailed by the New York Times for his rich tone and elegant phrasing, and by the Chicago Tribune for his splendid technique and musical sensitivity. In demand as a soloist, he plays with orchestras across the country and performs internationally as a chamber musician with the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center and with distinguished artists like Itzhak Perlman, Mitsuko Uchida, and Pinky Zuckerman. A top prize winner of the Primrose, Tardis, Washington, Johansson, and Stuhlberg International Viola competitions, Matthew received his bachelor's and master's degrees as an inaugural Kovner Fellow from the Juilliard School, where he continues to serve as teaching assistant to Heidi Castelman. Highlights this season include a world premiere by Brazilian composer Clarice Assad, several performances of the Telemann Viola Concerto in Alice Tully Hall, and his very own debut solo album on City Records, which is set to be released on February 8, 2019, and will include his own transcription of Waxman's Carmen Fantasy and the world premiere recording of a newly discovered miniature by Shostakovich titled Impromptu that was found only last year in the Moscow State Archive. Keep your ears and eyes open for the release of the first single from Matthew's solo album, which will come out next week on October 19th, 2018. In the episode, Matthew and I discuss several aspects of performance preparation, from the planning to the mental work necessary, as well as the importance to learn to better listen to ourselves and how that can transform our playing. Matthew dishes out tons of great information, so have a pen and paper ready, and let's go to the show. Matthew Lipman, it's so great to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's very exciting.
I have loved following your musical adventures for the past few years on Instagram and social media, and I'm so happy we have the chance to chat for a little bit. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So, for someone as young as you are, you have a super impressive profile already. You perform as a soloist with major orchestras, and you play recital and chamber music concerts with highly recognized musicians and some of the best halls around the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey? You know, how you got started and the road that got you where you are?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of all just snuck up on me. In fact, I never intended to be, when you say it like you did, big halls and nice collaborators, it sounds impressive, but I never really thought that I would be doing this. I started viola kind of by accident in public school in the 4th grade. And at the time, I didn't really have a lot of friends in school, and I wasn't behaving so well. And the viola became very quickly kind of my outlet to get all of, I guess, frustration out. And I fell in love with it so quickly. I actually remember thinking after 1 week of having the little rental at home that I wanted to become a musician. All it took was like plucking open strings for me. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I just became like a huge nerd. I studied with this wonderful violist in the southern suburbs, Matthew Mantell, who I think you know pretty well. And he just was able to kind of put me in the right direction. I guess I was pretty precocious, and he kind of just steered me the right way. And then for the last 3 years of high school, I studied with Roland Vamos, who was the viola professor at Northwestern University. And that was really key in my development, I think, as well, because his list of students goes on and on and on. And so the experience that he has teaching at the highest level really affected me deeply, because all of a sudden all of my attention was being directed in the right kind of ways. I mean, you know, I would show up to lessons. He would have assigned me, say, a Paganini Caprice or a difficult etude or something on the viola, and I would show up and be like, I don't know how to play this. I can't do it. And he, you know, not in any sort of mean way, he was like, actually, yeah, you can do it. And he kind of just made me strive for the ceiling. So that was really crucial I think in my development. And he also emphasized this kind of like amazing old school kind of juicy sound, which I think has stayed in my ear all these years. So I'm very grateful for him as well. And then I went to Juilliard and studied with Heidi Castelman, who actually is like my best friend now. I always tell people that she's like basically Buddha. she's she's like I don't even know how to start. I mean, I guess viola wise, she really emphasized having dimension in the sound, playing in a free way. So if by the end of high school with Mr. Vamos, I was kind of, I think I was playing very kind of tight and, you know, fast vibrato all the time and all of these things. She was really able to help me relax and be free musically. And also the way that she teaches the bow arm is like second to none, I think. I mean, basically for 4 years of undergrad, all she did was talk about my bow arm because I didn't really know how to use the bow at all before. And actually after college, I decided to see if I could take some lessons with my hero of the viola in Germany, Tabea Zimmermann. So actually, I'm still kind of flying over once in a blue moon if I have a recital or a concerto or something like that. I play that for Tabea, and let's see, where am I now? Okay, so after all of this teaching, Tabea has been amazing for me because it's basically not really teaching at this point. It's more like a mentorship. And she is kind of like, okay, you could sound better. You could be more free. And she kind of just like all of the teaching that I had until this point, it's all kind of coming to a point with her because she's not trying to change me. She's just trying to help me get better. And she's also very picky. I think the first lesson I ever had with her, she was like, every note you play is slightly out of tune. And I was like, oh my God, you're so mean. But she was like so right. And what she meant wasn't that I was messing up all over the place. It's just that the listening could be fine-tuned even that much more, and the intention behind every note. At least that's what I took away from it, because that's how she plays herself. And yeah, so that's my background, my pedagogical background, and I feel very, very lucky for this path.
It's so great. I love how, this combination of teachers and guides that you mentioned, how it really leads to the performer that you are today. All these, when you mentioned Mr. Vamos directing your attention in the right way and, working on this flowing bow arm with Heidi Castelman and, this mentorship with Tabea Zimmermann, it's really great to see how it really combines into having you becoming the player that you are, which is not a copy of any of these people, but a truly unique artist. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I feel very lucky to have had support in that exact way. That there's no copying. It's all just encouraging. So that's also what I try to do in my own teaching now. But that's a different story.
I remember going in a lesson with Svi Zeitlin at Eastman. This was maybe a couple months into my master's degree, and complaining to him how I felt like I was sounding worse and worse. And he was telling me how actually it was me who was starting to listen better and better. So
that's very true, actually.
I would agree with what you said about the importance of really listening intently to ourselves.
Actually, I never studied with Kim Kardashian officially, but I took a few lessons with her at Ravinia Staines Institute like 5 or 6 years ago. And one thing that really stuck with me that she said about growth is that it's not a linear line. It's actually plateaus. So when you are experiencing growth, you think that you sound horrible. And then you kind of reach a new level and then you're happy, but that just means that you're not actually growing. And it's okay because it's, it is supposed to be plateaued. But if you're not happy with how you're sounding, chances are you're actually getting better. So.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. I think it's so important for musicians, especially young musicians that might be tempted to get comfortable in the zone where they are happy. It's very important to hear.
Yeah.
Can we dig a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of practicing? As you said earlier, you started in fourth grade, which is sometimes considered a bit late. And by the way, I think this speaks to the importance of having music education in the schools. I feel that we are very struggling right now with convincing our politicians to, spend some money on music educations, but you can really see how music, first of all, we know all of the studies about how it really influences your cognitive abilities and can help with problem-solving things such as math and science and other things. But seeing how it gave you a purpose, and I feel like it brings people together and really has so many ramifications in our lives as a society. I think that we really must make an effort to maybe encourage politicians to keep in mind how music education is important in the schools for sure. But I'll get off my soapbox right now.
I totally agree. No, I mean, I think you're totally right. And it's not just for the people like me who become musicians. It's, a lot of people that I know who actually didn't wind up becoming musicians, their lives are so much more enriched because they played music, most of them going to great schools for college and having great jobs now, and and being multi-dimensional people. And I think the music lessons early on are a good reason for all of that. So
yeah, can we talk a little bit more about how it is that you went from fourth grade beginner to a Lincoln Center regular in such a short amount of time? We've touched about a few of those things and what you were referring to, and the teachings of Mr. Mantell and Mr. Vamos and Heidi Castelman, but what are the practicing skills that you feel were really key in your rapid development?
Well, that's tough because I didn't really know how to practice. I'm a kind of an example of somebody who, for whatever reason, got really good really quickly. And then I spent a lot of years trying to figure out, after I got good, what the heck I was doing. So I think by the time I was 12 years old, so in like 2.5 years, I was principal viola of Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra. And I literally did not know at all how this happened. And, if you asked me to play a scale, I wouldn't be able to. These kinds of things. It's like, I shouldn't have sounded as good as I did based on my knowledge of practicing or technique. So I think when I really started to understand, especially left-hand technique, was when I got to Mr. Vamos. Just how to put the left hand down, what kind of motion you want to grab the string with, what kind of sound you want to listen for. But I actually wound up having some pretty severe tendonitis in high school. Also because I think when you progress rapidly, your muscles actually don't have time to figure out exactly what to do. You're kind of doing something with your body that you don't have musculature to support. So a lot of the first 2 years of my studies at Juilliard were also trying to figure out how to play without tension. And I mean, it worked eventually, but it's kind of a weird, it can get pretty psychological because, if you are kind of progressing in a rapid way and expecting that the sky is the limit, then all of a sudden your arms are holding you back. It's kind of, you can get inside your head trying to figure out what went wrong, so to speak. But yeah, ultimately, I really think it's about, in regards to having an injury, it's actually not about taking time off. I think it's actually about being more consistent. And for me, what helped the most, and this is what Heidi helped me with, is that I wasn't getting anywhere when people told me, relax your arm or don't press this finger or whatever. That wasn't working. It was all about listening to the sound, actually, and what kind of dimension you can gain in the sound without being tense in your arms. And once I started to be able to hear that, then immediately my arm problems went away. And it's much better to practice, I think, maybe 30 minutes a day if you're injured slowly than it is to take a week off and then try to practice again for 2, 3, 4 hours, because you just really need to retrain your muscles.
Mm-hmm. And in addition to this, there's the fact that when you're in your teenage years, you're growing and, the body is changing. So that can add to the injury factor. But I really loved what you just said about really listening to the sound. And, I loved how you put it, that you're listening for how much dimension you can gain in the sound. I feel that so often it's easy to take what the teacher says and go home and try to apply it without really understanding it at a deeper level. And what you talk about sounds to me like you really took the time to understand for yourself how things worked in your own body. So definitely something to aspire for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that I was forced to go home and try to understand it. Actually, when I first met Heidi I think I was like 15 years old in the Perlman music program in the summer, studying with the Vamos, or actually just Mr. Vamos, I didn't actually understand what the heck she was trying to get me to do for a long time. I mean, this was the kind of like focused, path that I was on. I want to go be louder and faster and, play more difficult repertoire and win this competition, and which definitely has a lot of value, especially when you're progressing as a teenager. But yeah, the dimension and the sound thing, I mean, that was huge. And there were a few other factors besides just the injury. I think playing the viola in general is the way that the instrument speaks because of its proportions. I mean, the viola should be basically 22 inches. The body of the viola should be 22 inches long based on its, proportion to the pitch, in between a violin and cello. But obviously that would make it too big to play. So the instrument already starts off at a disadvantage. And because of the way it speaks, the slow nature, it actually does require this kind of balanced technical approach rather than pressing, or philosophically, the instrument itself doesn't really work when you try to go, faster and louder. You kind of have to take a step back and really understand the body and the way that the string vibrates anyway. And on top of that, when I was 18, I was loaned this amazing Go-Friller viola that I actually still play on from Rachel Barton Pine's foundation. And I mean, for like probably 3 years, the first 3 years I had it, it just really sounded horrible. It's one of these old, and like, I think a lot of people talk about Strads being like amazing only if you know how to play it, and that they're really difficult to play, and that you have to play in the way that they want, not you. I would say this was for sure the case with my viola, and I think it's because the arching is so high on it that if you try to play it in a pressed way, you just really get this like croaked sound. I mean, it just really doesn't sound good. So it was like a combination of me trying to not play with pain, trying to figure out how the Go-Friller worked, and also becoming addicted to this resonant sound with lots of overtones. So I don't know. I'm kind of just blabbering, but that's
no, this
I don't know if that made any sense.
It makes so much sense. I love, this emphasis you talk about into searching for this sound. And it's so true for string instruments for sure, how we try to produce and then we actually end up choking the sound. And I think that applies for a lot of instruments as well. Even on the piano, there's so many more colors you can go when you know how to get the amplitude without the sheer force, But, you mentioned competition a couple minutes ago, and I'd like to speak more about this a little bit because you've participated and won several international competitions, the Primrose, Curtis, Washington, Johansson, and Stolberg international viola competitions. Can we talk a little bit how they've helped shape your path? And after that, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the process of preparing for these competitions. But how do you feel participating and entering these competitions shape your path?
It's hard. It's hard. if I think about having to do a competition now, I don't think I would like it very much. So just to start off, I think you have to really be in the right mindset and the right time in your life. And that might be different for everyone. I was actively doing competitions, I think from maybe age 16 until like 21. So pretty early in terms of the international ones. But those were my biggest source of inspiration. I mean, they really got me into the practice room. And I think it started out more as like I keep mentioning this Vamos style, faster, louder, higher. And I just kind of wanted to do them to maybe kind of prove myself, or I don't know, take over the competition scene or whatever. But then it became so much more about the process, which is what you were mentioning. And, I didn't actually win first place in Primrose or Tertis. I got to the finals both times, but never first place. And I was really kind of heartbroken when I did Primrose when I was 18, and I was like, I have to win it and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't win first. And then I sort of was like, you know what, that's okay, actually, because I don't think I was playing at a level where I deserved to win, honestly. But that helped me get to that level. It's kind of like you get better after you lose, because hindsight's 2020. It's like
Yes.
yeah, and I don't know. It's a great. I think they're a great experience. If especially if you're in school and maybe you only have 1 or 2 times a year to perform in public. It's nerve-wracking for sure, but it's a good excuse to work for something and go out there and do it. So I think they can be vital, but of course, only if you're in the right mindset. Now, it's been so long since I compared my playing to somebody else's, and I think I would probably just crack under the pressure of doing that. But when I was younger, I was a little more fearless. So
Yes, I agree with you on that for sure. And how is that process of preparing? What does it look like when you're practicing and you're preparing for a competition, an international competition that usually end up having entire recitals, entire concerti, How was that for you? How would you practice to prepare for a competition?
Sure. Well, actually, my other teacher in undergrad, Misha Amory, I kind of took lessons with him, I would say, a third of the time, along with Heidi. He was really helpful in shaping that how to prepare. And one thing that stuck with me in terms of competitions that he said is always play to your strengths. Sometimes people choose really hard repertoire or something that they think will impress the judges. But if it's not something that lets you shine, then I would shy away from it. And that's just in terms of kind of the strategy behind a competition. But basically, what you want to do is you want to play things and that you're good at, and play them through a lot before. So never play something for the first time in a competition, right? Preparing for the Primrose, I remember I played the repertoire in studio class multiple times in school before going, and that's crucial. And in terms of the actual practicing, I used to make little charts and lists and time limits for practicing, which I did adhere to. So I would say, okay, back when I practiced 6 hours a day or whatever, preparing for Primrose, for example, Paganini La Campanella would be an hour, and I'd focus on playing this trill section in tune and with resonance, or these thirds, trying to work them up to speed. Very specific goals, kind of like something that you can check off the box. Nowadays, that doesn't work for me. I don't have as much time to practice, but having specific goals is still a crucial part, at least for me, in my practicing. Even if you have 15 minutes before a show and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to fix this one section. If you have a plan, a technical plan and a musical plan before you even pick up the instrument, you can accomplish so much in so little time, rather than just kind of mindlessly repeating for hours and hours. And actually nowadays, I would say I spend more time practicing scales than I do. Well, that's not true. If I have a solo performance, I obviously do practice the repertoire. But, in terms of just kind of like everyday practicing, I actually mostly practice scales, and I try to create little exercises, like double stop exercises, based on how I'm feeling that day. So if I'm like, wow, the performance last night, my fifths were so out of tune, then I'll just practice a fifth scale, and focus on making the intervals ring in a kind way. You have to be kind to yourself. I never got better when I was like, oh, this is out of tune. I'm so horrible. How do I fix this? It's kind of just allowing yourself the space to figure it out. And I've always found that that's much more helpful. But yeah, in terms of preparing for the actual competitions, I used to be pretty intense about the goals and checking off the hours practice and stuff like that. So
I might have to play that last bit to my students before every lesson. I agree with you so much. I've said this before, but I find that when we're students, we have this luxury of time. You can work on the same concerto for a whole semester, but once you enter the professional life, we learn so much faster out of necessity, but it is because we become very much goal-oriented, and we really trigger these problem-solving skills that we all acquire throughout the years, And the other thing you said, which I love so much, is becoming a big topic of discussion in my studio for the past year or so, is this creativity that you mentioned, playing a fifth scale, for example. I agree with you so much. I feel that stimulating our creativity into shaping new exercises like this, it keeps things so much more interesting and much more fun in the practice room. And I know that I've been doing that too, especially in the last year, because there comes a point where, like you, we spend, I think, more time practicing skills and technical things to stay in shape. And it makes it so much more fun when we, challenge ourselves with coming up with new exercises like this. And, the third thing you mentioned, which I also think is more and more important nowadays, and I see it with my student, is being kind to yourself, creating this powerful and empowering in their dialogue, instead of just, you missed this shift, therefore you know nothing and are probably the worst human being that ever existed. I totally agree with you. Thank you so much. I might have to send you a check.
No, not at all. Actually, something that you just said reminded me, I want to just talk for a second, because we're talking about practicing, about metronomes. I feel like I finally learned how to use a metronome.
Oh, please share.
Maybe within the last year or two. I used to hate practicing with them because I felt they were so confining. And if you approach a metronome from the angle that I have to be together with it, I think that's wrong. I think that you're actually going to wind up being more tense. But what I've sort of discovered, and actually I think Tabea helped me with this, is that the beat of the metronome is not something to stay together with. It's something to internalize, by which I mean you should be able to be as free as possible around the metronome and still be able to line up with it. And what I think this means technically isn't that we're, training ourselves to go through motions in a metronomic, rhythmic way. But I think what it means is that we're fine-tuning technical processes to land wherever we want them to be so precise with maybe a string crossing, for example, or a shift. It's not like we're training our bodies to do it 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's rather to have the freedom in a shift or a string crossing or whatever to be able to land anywhere, whenever you want. Because then when you turn off the metronome, your technique is so precise and so relaxed that you don't worry about missing the shift because you know you can just land anywhere you want. You know what I'm saying? And so sometimes I actually practice with the metronome on the off beats because that's even, it's really difficult, but it helps you internalize the pulse rather than trying to line up with the metronome. So that's my metronome thing.
Ooh, that's so good. I love it. And again, practicing with the metronome on the offbeat is a very creative and challenging way. Thanks so much for sharing. Do you have any more of those really great tips?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll think about it.
That sounds great. You have a very busy performance schedule, as you mentioned earlier, and I was wondering I know that performing is also a training in itself. So I don't know if I can guess that by now you are anticipate performances with maybe less anxiety that you did as a young performer, but how was it for you when you first started on the scene and getting these great concerts? How would you prepare mentally for these concerts?
I'm glad you asked because this is also a huge learning process. There's a huge learning curve. I started performing with the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center about 4 years ago, and I started because I did win the CMS2 audition when I was an undergrad. But what happens is that you don't actually start performing with them until almost 2 years after the audition because they have to plan their seasons and whatever. But the first time I played with them was when Lawrence Power, this kind of, actually, the name is fitting, powerhouse British violist, was scheduled to play Trout Quintet with Gary Hoffman and Ani Kavafian and Enon Barnerton, these huge names in Tully, and he got sick last minute, and so I had to fill in on a moment's notice, never having played the piece, and that was like my start to the whole thing.
Wow.
So, I mean, talk about pressure. I was like freaking out, and I remember, it's not even like it's a Schubert viola part. It's not like it's Bartok concerto, but I remember practicing so much in like the 2 days I had that the calluses on my fingers like split open, and I was like, oh my God, this is probably too much. But okay, what's the point of this? The point is that despite the stress of a big performance, I think mentally preparing is extremely valuable, and kind of being able to put yourself in the hall before you actually walk out on stage. And this is something that you gain from experience. Now I actually look forward to bigger halls and more kind of nerve-wracking experiences because I find them to be incredibly, incredibly useful to progression mentally. So, for example, last year when I played with the Minnesota Orchestra, the Mozart Sinfonia Concertant, I know that hall is huge, and I knew that this was a big deal, but it's a piece that I knew, and as I was preparing for it, I kind of just thought about what it feels like on a stage like that, and what it sounds like to hear yourself in a big resonant hall, and that actually shapes your preparation a lot. The way that you listen to yourself is completely different if you're in a practice room versus if you're actually in a hall or imagining yourself to be in a hall. And I find that a lot of technical challenges are actually just fixed if you can zoom out in that kind of listening. It's kind of a cool phenomenon. I mean, if you listen to yourself from the back of the hall, your vibrato automatically goes into the right kind of oscillation and depth because that's what that's what's required to project, right? You need to get the note to ring. And versus in a practice room, you can't tell what you're doing because there's no resonance. There's nothing to listen to from this perspective. So, and a lot of that is about body balance as well, physical relaxation. if you're playing a big concert and you're tense, then you're not able to listen in that kind of way. So, but that, like you said, it's all about the experience. It probably took a year or two of playing in Alice Tully before I felt like I could actually do that, look forward to hearing my sound in Tully rather than dreading if I was good enough, or wondering if I was good enough and kind of dreading the anxiety aspect of it.
And by the way, I watched the YouTube video of that performance of the Symphonia Concertante it's Aaron Keefe in the Minnesota, and everybody should listen to that. It's so great. It's terrific. And, you talked about how, the body tension, you looked like you were having so much fun and you felt, it looks as though you felt very comfortable. I highly recommend it. When you talk about this thing, such as the vibrato going to the back of the hall, it requires such a high level of awareness. This is really something that if I could give anything to my students, I think it would be this, how to develop this awareness. And it comes through, would you agree? It comes through listening. It comes through tuning into what your body is doing. How would you go about telling a student to start developing this awareness? What are some ways that you think we can start to experiment and develop this really important awareness in playing?
Sure. Well, a word that you said a while ago in the interview is context, and it's a hard thing to be able to zoom out and be objective about your playing. But I think it's really important to be as picky as possible with yourself and minute about all of your technical challenges. But I think it's key to be able to do the opposite and zoom out and say, okay, what's the goal? What do I actually want to sound like right now? Or how do I see myself performing this piece? That, I would say, that is key, because then you automatically approach your playing from multiple angles.
Mm-hmm. You have a clarity of vision.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Matthew, I could keep you here all day, but I'm sure you have plenty of things to do. But how about a round of rapid fire questions before we say goodbye?
Sure.
And I know they're hard to answer, shortly, but we'll do the best.
I'll try.
So for the people who are dreaming of becoming a concert violist like you, can you tell us a little bit about what your life looks like?
Oh, sure. I'm always on a plane. Let's see. I just arrived home yesterday, September 3rd, after not having been in my apartment since May 25th. And I was lugging around a 72-pound suitcase all summer. I actually love traveling, but that's one thing that I would say to keep in mind if you're an aspiring concert musician, is that you will always be on a plane.
And you need a good suitcase.
Yeah, or a few.
And how about a performance that has stayed with you throughout the years?
Oh, well, there have been so many for many different reasons. Obviously, the one I mentioned before, the Minnesota Orchestra, was pivotal for me. It was my first major orchestra performance. And like you said, I actually had fun. But another one that sticks out is one that I just did last May with the violinist Augustin Hadelich, cellist Clive Greensmith, and pianist Enon Barnaton of Foray Quartet. I think it's incredibly, incredibly inspiring to play chamber music with musicians who are not only one of the best at their craft. Especially Augustin. I've admired this guy's violin playing for so long, and to be 2 feet away from him and hearing him through the process is so inspiring. But they're so humble, all three of them, and it was one of the most magical experiences because it was 100% about Foray. It was not about our egos or trying to one-up anyone. It was all about the music. And because of that combination of amazing players and humility, it was probably my favorite performance ever, actually. So these are the performances you kind of look forward to as a professional, when everything just kind of gels and you're all on the same page. And it was absolutely
right.
magical.
That's kind of what I think we envision as young kids when we think of becoming musicians, or those kind of experiences. So what we've mentioned a lot, but what skills do you think young musicians studying today should acquire in addition to learning to play their instruments?
Oh, that's a good one.
Other than carrying suitcases.
Right. Clarity of vision, like you put it, is important, but to remember that once you have a clear vision, no matter how much you want to accomplish something, ultimately at least I find it helps to make it not about you, to make it about music and about collaboration. I'm not so sure how things worked 50 years ago, but I think they worked differently than they do now, and that you could sort of be a recluse and be a great player and make it and do what you want, and didn't matter how well you worked with others. But in every field, I think in this generation, it's collaboration is such a huge part of the way things work now. So to be open and be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and to appreciate their point of view, even if you disagree with it, is really key. That's
so good. So good. How about a favorite tool in the practice room?
Well, offbeat metronome as of lately. Let's see, what else? That's it. I don't know.
That's a good one. And how about a favorite book that you would recommend the listeners?
Oh, geez. Admittedly, I don't read as much as I should. I just finished Truman Capote in Cold Blood, but that's not a music.
Oh, it could be any book.
Well, the Primrose book is one that's really inspiring. That series of interviews by David Dalton that I got a while ago, of course, for violists. And actually, speaking of Primrose, another book I just got, I stumbled across this. This is not a book, but it's a little picture book and, details about Primrose's Guarneri viola. And a friend of mine gave that to me because he knows I'm obsessed with Guarneri violas, and so that was really cool. So that I would say, but that's not a book.
That's clear. How about a piece of advice that you've received and that you'd like to transmit to our listeners?
I would say, it sounds cliche, but stay true to yourself. There will always be lots of challenges, especially when you're younger, and people who are in positions of power above you have such strong opinions of how things should go, and it's a really fine line between doing what they want and doing what you believe in. But I would say riding that line is extremely important, because if you give in and maybe sacrifice your own ideals, then you also lose something about your artistry. But at the same time, you can't be, it's not helpful to anyone to be stubborn. So, staying true to yourself, but in a generous way.
Thank you for that. This is great. And do you have an actionable tip that the listeners could implement today in their musical lives?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We didn't talk about this, but listening to resonance between intervals. This is huge. It helps with intonation so much. I mean, if you're kind of trying to play a note in tune, just lining it up with the tuner, it's never going to work. You have to think about the resonance between intervals all the time. Even if you're playing a Bach fugue and you have a string crossing from the lowest string to the highest string, that interval should ring together. So that's huge. I really emphasize that a lot in my own playing and with my students.
Matthew, what does the next season have in store for you? Where can we expect to see you?
Oh, sure. Well, on November 29th, I'm making my Lincoln Center recital debut with pianist Henry Kramer, and it will be live streamed online at the Chamber Music Society's online portal. And there'll be a newly commissioned work by this wonderful Brazilian composer Clarissa Saad, and also my rendition of Carmen Fantasy on viola, among other things. And a CD with the same program will be coming out February 9th on Sadie Records label, but it will be available for pre-order or even at my concert in November. So look for that, and a bunch of other things.
That sounds amazing. I'm going to put a link in the show notes for all of these things, and as well as your website. Matthew Lipman, it's been so much fun talking with you today.
Likewise.
I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out for a little bit. I look forward to seeing your incredible journey continue to unfold. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you guys so much for listening. As fate would have it, Matthew and I performed at the same event in the Chicago area last night, and that was awesome for me because not only did I have the chance to listen to him live for the first time, but I was able to ask him a follow-up question, which I didn't get to in the interview, about what he thinks made him progress so fast as a beginner. And the conclusion that we came to was that it was most likely the combination of several factors, including his strong love of the instrument, a natural ability to problem solve, and the fact that he really likes to explore things in depth, and he's curious about finding out all he can about the topics or the activities he's interested in. So there you have it. You can find the show notes for this episode at mindoverfinger.com. I would also love to connect with you, so join the conversation on social media. Let me know what inspires you, what specific questions you have about mindful practice, and what other topics and guests you would like to hear about in future episodes. I am Mind Over Finger on all platforms. Next week, I'll be talking to Nathan Cole, First Associate Concertmaster of the LA Philharmonic and founder of Nate's Violin. He and I go into the nitty-gritty details of mindful practice, so that's a conversation that you don't want to miss. I'm also working on a special project for you guys for the month of November, and I'll have more details in the next episode. If you have the chance, please head over to iTunes to subscribe and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Again, thank you, and a bientôt.